My name's Christopher Pelling. I'm Regius Professor of Greek at University of Oxford. I'm interested in Shakespeare, I'm interested in Plutarch as well, and those two things go together because I'm particularly interested in those plays where Shakespeare is using the Greek author Plutarch as his main and only source, and one of those plays is the Coriolanus. William Shakespeare, the fairly well-known English poet and dramatist. This Coriolanus is a play that comes, I suppose, towards the end of his writing life. It's quite close in time to Antony and Cleopatra. It's some 7 or 8 years after Julius Caesar. It's at a time when he's absolutely at the heights of his power. Most people put it in 1607, 1608, and that's because one of the things that Shakespeare often does is to make things very relevant to very recent events. He sort of zooms in to help the audience see that these things are still very relevant indeed. And some of the things are quite trivial very early on. You've got Coriolanus saying to the ordinary people, he's not very sympathetic to, and you are no surer no than is the coal of fire upon the ice. And people normally think that that's a reference back to earlier on in 1607, when it was one of those years when the Thames froze over, and there's evidence for people having braziers of coals upon the fire. But there's a much more important contemporary reference, contemporary relevance, and that's the widespread Midland Revolt of earlier in 1607. This is connected with enclosures, it's connected with the nobles taking in what had been common grazing land, and connected with that is also a matter of corn prices, of dearth. Corn prices were very high that year after a series of very bad harvests. There were about 5,000 people involved. Their leader was a certain John Reynolds, often known as Captain Pouch, because he said he had a pouch, and in his pouch there was some secret that would keep everybody free from any harm. It was a very peaceable revolt, but what wasn't at all peaceable was the way in which it was put down. There were horsemen sent in, there were 50 people executed, the leaders were hanged, drawn and quartered. Now it's very interesting what Shakespeare does with this. It's also quite interesting to see that it's rather different from what was in his source, because it is very much the corn, it's very much the famine, it's the need to have corn at their own price that is what really stirs up people, and that's what we get right in the first scene. That's what we get again later on in the play when Coriolanus is standing for the consulship, that if we can only get rid of Coriolanus, we'll have corn at our own price. That is a very big theme, and we can see Shakespeare really playing that up. There wasn't actually the main reason for the grievance in his source. There were all sorts of other things going on. One of the big issues in Plutarch is usury. It's the tremendous amount of interest that the poor are being charged. Well, of course, we know that Shakespeare's perfectly capable of doing quite a lot with usury. There is this play called The Merchant of Venice, but he doesn't do anything with that here. There was also a plan of the nobles to get the ordinary people out of the place, to send them to a place called Velitri, which was absolutely ridden by plague at the time, and this was again a case where the people had a very good case. But it's nearly all about the corn, nearly all about the famine that there is in Shakespeare. He does very interesting things with it. It's not irrelevant indeed that you've got Menenius Agrippa, the rather complacent Menenius Agrippa, coming in very early on and telling his little fable to the ordinary people. The fable about the belly and the other parts of the body. How the other parts of the body were complaining because they just fed things to the belly, and the belly didn't do any work. Well, it's not perhaps the most tactful of stories to tell to famished men. Menenius Agrippa, he knows how to talk to people. He's very good at joshing with people. He very much contrasts with Coriolanus himself, who's got no idea at all of how to talk to ordinary people. But it's still the most tactful thing to say. Probably a role that ought to be played by a well-fed actor. It's interesting later on in the play as well, where Menenius, where he's heard that Coriolanus in among the Volskis is being very unsympathetic, said, he had not dined. Has he dined? He's so preoccupied with food as Menenius. So there's a very, very strong focus on corn and on famine, which Shakespeare gives. All the nobles are going to be associated with the upper class, for people who are the oppressors, and it is one of the interesting things in Shakespeare's play that on the whole there's no great disagreement among the nobles about the commons, what the commons are like. It's the issue is very much more on not on whether the commons are a good thing or a bad thing, or they've got a case or whether they haven't got a case. It's how to deal with it. It's about tactics. The ordinary people are having a bad time, and one can really understand their point of view in the first scene, which is not to say necessarily that the play as a whole is pulling for the commons. The play was probably put on in Blackfriars, and it's often thought that Blackfriars had a richer audience, an audience that was more well-to-do than the audience in the Globe. So, and also these are of course London people, and it's not unusual for London people not always to feel total sympathy with people out there in the provinces, and in some ways indeed Shakespeare is a bit less sympathetic to the ordinary people than Plutarch was. But the one thing that audience will know, however rich they were, wherever their sympathies were, they will know that this is the sort of issue that really divides people, that people feel very strongly about. And there can be all sorts of discussions and criticisms of how you handle it, and strong, uncompromising handling of this sort of issue is exactly what James had done, and must have been exactly what people were talking about in London and elsewhere. They understand why it's a sort of issue that really bites, why it still matters. He several times does go to Rome to find inspiration. He's very good at actually making these apparently distant themes, apparently these distant people, somehow be very relevant to issues of his own day. In Julius Caesar, there's the question of republicanism, of kings. Do we try to have a revolution? This is a time where the rights and wrongs of monarchy are being very much discussed. Antony and Cleopatra, again, though it's a play by now James is on the throne, a play with an extremely powerful woman calling all the shots, a woman who is one of the most powerful people in the world. Well, that again is going to have a lot of contemporary resonance for people who've lived through the reign of Queen Elizabeth and has seen the end of Queen Elizabeth as well. There may be something about the very distance that the Roman world gives that means that people can think about really contemporary issues, really live issues, and think with a sort of distance and a sort of detachment, and just approach the issues in a new and particularly reflective way. The plays in themselves a testimony to how thinking about the classics and thinking about the contemporary world are things that go closely together. They went closely together for Shakespeare and his audience, can for us.